Let's make a grid of squares. We could do this in several ways, but this video covers Illustrator's built-in grid feature. For this demo, we'll say that each square should be 30 by 30 pixels, and the grid itself should have 10-pixel gutters between the rows and columns. I'm being specific about all the dimensions because the controls provided for entering row, column, and gutter sizes work in a way that may seem pretty strange at first. In fact, it may seem pretty strange afterwards, too. Start by getting the Rectangle tool. Click and hold if necessary to expose all the shape tools. Draw a rectangle of any size. We'll set the final size in the Grid dialog box. Go to the Object menu, find the Path submenu, and click on Split into Grid. I'll click the Preview checkbox so we can see what we're doing. First, I'll set the number of rows to 10. Then I'll set the row height to 30. So far, so good. But when I set the gutter, the space between rows, to 10, the height suddenly jumps to some number I didn't want. What's happening here is that the total height doesn't change to allow for all the rows and gutters. The dialog box is trying to keep everything inside the height of the box I just drew. If I had drawn it exactly the right size, everything would work out, but I'd rather let the dialog box do the math. So the only way to enter the specs I'm aiming for is to start by setting the total height for the grid. 10 rows of 30 pixels is 300, plus 9 gutters in between rows, 10 pixels each, is another 90. While I was entering 390, the total height was, just for an instant, only 3 pixels. So the dialog box momentarily set the whole grid to that height, which of course was way too short to handle 10 rows of any size at all, let alone with gutters. So it had to reset the number of rows to 1, which is why now the height and gutter fields have suddenly gotten disabled. Most numerical input boxes in Illustrator apply the new value only when you move the cursor out of the input box. But this particular panel updates everything continuously as you type. I'll return the row number to 10 and reset the row height to 30. Now the automatic calculation is actually helping and the gutter height has changed to 10. So the secret to using this dialog box, if you need to enter precise dimensions directly, is to set the total first. Then you should set the row or column gutter to exactly what you want, and the row or column measurement will take up the slack. Of course, you still have to first figure out the overall size of the whole grid. When you enter those dimensions, the other values will change, like they did a minute ago. So you then set the row or column count, and then set the gutter value, and let the dialog box calculate the row height or column width for you. We're done, finally, and we now have a perfect 10 by 10 grid with each square exactly 30 by 30 pixels, and all the gutters exactly 10 pixels. After using the Split into Grid command, all the resulting squares are individual objects. They're not grouped, so you can immediately start working on each one individually. At this stage, you're probably thinking this is one amazingly weird way to enter a simple set of measurements, and you're right. But there's a completely different way to use the Grid dialog box that's a lot more intuitive and doesn't require you to do any arithmetic in advance. Here's how it works. Let's start all over again. This time, just to be different, we'll make 12 rows and columns, 25 pixels square, with 10 pixel gutters. This new approach takes into account the fact that direct entry into the total fields tends to mess up all the other entries. Our solution is simple. We don't enter anything in the total fields. Instead, we use the up-down buttons, and this avoids the whole problem. This time, we enter the number of rows or columns first. Then we enter the gutter size, and we skip entering the row height or column width entirely. Instead, we go to the total field and hold down the up or down button until the height or width field gets to the value we want. In other words, while running the total up or down, keep your eye on the height or width field and stop when it gets to the right number. There are a few other ways to make grids, which will be covered in other videos. One approach is to copy and paste boxes. It's actually a very quick way to make a grid, and it doesn't have to be a grid of rectangles. Another approach is to create an object and use the transform special effect in the appearance panel. This gives you what appears to be a grid, and you can then use the object expand appearance command to change it into a group of actual separate objects.